Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's live stream. Lots to talk about, and you can never have enough Phils on a live stream. That's my philosophy. So we welcome both our Phils this evening. So do fire comments and questions in. We'll try and bring a lot of those in. But as ever, there's lots going on. So welcome, Phil Holden.
Good evening.
Our deputy leader. Welcome, Phil Tanzer, our man in the far north, up in Durness.
Good evening. Good to see you guys.
When Phil first came in, I asked him where he was. I assumed he must be in some sort of hotel because his house is so distinctive in all sorts of ways that to see a blank wall behind him, I thought he can't possibly be at home. But he is. He's in a corridor in his house there. Right. So without further ado, where shall we start tonight? I'd say that we've got an awful lot of things to talk about this evening. So let's start here. This was an interesting one. I had a look at the details of this case. Grooming is not the right word. So abuse gang in Glasgow were sentenced to get very long sentences in court in Glasgow just a couple of days ago. But the point I want to make, what they did was obviously utterly hideous, and the punishments seem pretty severe, as they should be. Absolutely horrific story. But the point I wanted to make about it was what's happening at the moment is the grooming gang issue. It's really been fueled by people like, for example, the Reform Party, other campaigners. It's been used as that this is an immigration story. We want to focus on it to make our point about immigration. Whereas this one, the perpetrators look like sort of white Scottish natives. So that angle isn't on it. I think it's just interesting. With this story, you might bet people coming in and it's about violence against women and girls. That's the key issue here. Men are the baddies. Women are the goodies. Whereas you've got other people with other stories trying to say, it's the immigrants that are the baddies. So I just thought it would be interesting. So I can imagine maybe some people might be scrolling through their social media feed and, Pakistani grooming gang. All right, you need to tweet about that. Oh, yeah. This one comes up. White people. Oh, no. We don't need to bother about that one. Let's keep scrolling until we find something by an immigrant. Which to say, the crime levels among immigrants in different communities is a very important issue. We mustn't shy away from addressing those issues. But it's just a curious state of affairs I think we've got into with this. So, what do you think?
I think the UK needs to start talking about the death penalty again for the worst crimes. And I'm not saying in this case, because I haven't looked into details of this case, and I'm not talking about perpetrators of the grooming scandals or any particular case, but I'm not even saying that I'm in favor of the death penalty, but I do think that there's an appetite in the population for justice that is immediate, and for people that do the worst crimes to never be in the public again, and also not costing the taxpayer millions of pounds. So that's what I would highlight in a case like this.
Okay, what do you think of the film?
I've not really been following the sentences on either side, so I don't know if there's an issue of discrepancy of sentence lengths or things like that. Obviously, my belief is same crime, same punishment for groups of people, same publicity you should get for each case. That's where I'd come from.
What do you think about? So my wife is from Botswana. In Botswana, they do have the death penalty, but only for the most severe crimes, murder with intent and without regret. And there, as far as I know, first of all, it has to be 100% proven that the person did it. And also there needs to be an aspect of intentional cruelty and, let's say, lack of humanity in the actions.
Mm-hmm. I'd kind of rather not open up the can of worms there, because I think you see the the swings you get in politics, you know, and what the most severe crimes could be. And it would probably end up as being praying outside an abortion clinic silently, you know, or something like that, you know. So yeah, and I think, you know, it concerns me that the popularity of, you know, some of the kind of death-related things that you have on television, say, or film, Hunger Games, Squid Games, you know, that those seem like kind of back to the days of gladiators, you know, and things like that, of people wanting the entertainment, you know. And I think that was, you know, what the death penalty was in the past in, you know, Scotland, was it was like a public event, go out and watch somebody be hanged, you know, kind of thing. And so unless we can get our justice system delivering good verdicts, I'd rather not open up the can of worms of the death penalty at the moment. But,
yeah.
My take on the death penalty is I'm not a campaigner for it in any way, shape, or form. When I hear the arguments against it, I often think they're not very good arguments. And I think people's intuition is in tune with the death penalty. And the reason I think that is when people go and see a film, often in a film, someone's set up as the baddie, aren't they? There are all sorts of terrible things in the film. Then at the end, they get their comeuppance and they get killed. I don't think no one's intuition, well, mine certainly doesn't, I don't think other people does either, says, all right, that was a bit much. I know it was really bad, he did all those awful things, but wow, you know, that was a bit tough on him. So I think it does accord with our intuitions. But as Phil said, that there is the side of it that it's a societal endorsement of a form of, whatever you call it, brutality, violence, whatever, which maybe has a wider effect. So if there was a referendum on the death penalty, which way would I vote? I'm not absolutely certain, but I think when I heard the people arguing against it, I wouldn't be very convinced. But I'm not a campaigner for it in any way, shape, or form. When it was abandoned, a substantial majority of the public was still in favour of it. But now the public in general, I think, is against it. But it's maybe been swinging a bit recently. If there were to be a referendum and the public were to hear arguments for and against, I think people would probably vote to bring it back. That would be my guess.
I think whether the public would vote in favor or against it would depend on current cases. So, for example, well, obviously the case with the 3 girls being killed recently, I think that would massively increase the endorsement of the death penalty, which I'm not sure I like the idea that the public decides based on a strong emotional response. I think the best decisions are being made in a sound mind and without emotions running wild.
Yeah, quite agree. Now, this was a story I came across on social media. I'm a single gay man trying to have a baby. I'll make it happen. And I think the next slide's about this as well. So surrogacy concern, which you should follow them on X or wherever else if you can. But they highlight these things, and the stories are just horrible. Oh, Phil's disappeared. I assume that's internet connection. He'll probably be back in a minute. But the stories are pretty grim to read. But I think this is one of those areas where, as the family party, we pick up on this sort of thing quite regularly. The other parties, you just won't hear a squeak out of them. They wouldn't touch it. But Phil, before you comment on that, let me just give you a quote or two from it. I bought a large pack. Oh, let's get Phil back. So here's a quote from this man. I bought a large pack of 10 eggs rather than a standard pack of 6. I mean, how about that then? Although they gave me 13. Then last April I did ICSI, a fertility treatment in which they inject live sperm into the eggs. All 13 of the eggs survived the thawing process. 9 were fertilized. So in other words, as far as I'm concerned, that's 9 new human lives created. I've now got 5 viable embryos out of 13 eggs. It cost me about £15,000 for the whole package, including the eggs. I mean, it's just, a bit more. this was an earlier stage. He looked for a surrogate, then gave up and went it alone. He said, I'm still looking for a surrogate. It's illegal to pay a surrogate in the UK, except for their reasonable expenses. I can't find one abroad because it's too expensive. In Mexico City, it's about £70,000. In America, it's more than £100,000. I don't want to go for a cheaper place with poor aftercare and take any risks. It's the same when I got a hair transplant. I did it in the UK and not Turkey. Phil, Tanza, you in particular. Just one last thing. I decided to use donor eggs from an egg bank because they're screened for defects as well. So, Phil Tanza, what are you making of this?
Yeah, my position, I think, gets more and more radical when it comes to topics like abortion, which I was pro-choice when I was a young person, even though I always said, I would never consider it in my life. Like if I would ever get a woman pregnant, I would never opt for that. But I thought, because I grew up in a liberal democracy where abortion was just normalized, I thought that's just like, people need the option. I'm now of the opinion that there is absolutely no reason for abortion. So I would outright completely ban it, and I would also completely ban surrogacy, and I would criminalize it. My tolerance for this playing of God and the disregard for human life, it's absolutely intolerable for me now. And that feeling grows with more and more examples like this one that I see, where people talk about babies and lives as an accessory. I mean, comparing it to a hair transplant, and it's so dehumanizing, and it's terrible, and I feel incredibly sorry for the fertilized eggs, but I also really don't want any of these children to grow up with this person. It's awful, absolutely awful.
Mm-hmm. Phil?
I think just from your reading of it, the commercial aspect really shines through. Of, screening the embryos, of the cost of the eggs. It was like, was it £15,000 or dollars, and then 70,000 for a surrogate in Mexico. That it's the complete commercialization of life, basically. And so you have 9 lives created, and this guy hasn't got anyone to put any of these lives into at all. Is there do they somehow freeze the embryos or something like that once they're fertilized? What's the thinking
I would
there?
assume he must have found a surrogate, one way or another, or was looking for one.
Yeah.
That's there's no way of avoiding that part, that ingredient at the moment.
But he was saying that the eggs were already fertilized.
Yeah.
Surely there's quite a time limit on once that happens,
Yes.
or is there a?
Not sure.
Yeah.
But do you think this is an argument waiting to be won? Because it's not like a red hot LGBT issue, or is it?
Well,
Maybe
it is in this
actually.
case, and it's being presented as that, isn't it, by the Scottish government, saying we will actively, try and provide this treatment for single people,
Yeah.
and
but it's feminists who are against it. It's a brand of feminists. Sometimes the same feminists who are against transgender ideology.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if this might be an area that the arguments might enter the mainstream a little bit more. I really just strike at the heart, I suppose, of same-sex parenting.
Well, with the exception of let's say a woman can't have children, and she has a sister, and she asked the sister if she could carry her baby. That would pretty much be the only situation where a woman probably wouldn't do it for the money, which means that every time a baby is born into surrogacy, a woman who needs money is being taken advantage of. And in that way, it's very similar to pornography, to be honest, where, sorry, but there are practically no porn actors who don't do it for the money, and then you don't have the choice. And here, if a woman agrees to carry a child and give it up, and does it for money, that is, you can't consent to that. If you feel financially in the position that you have to do that, I don't think that you can really consent to that.
No. The heart of it as well, it's the child. The child hasn't made it. The child hasn't consented to not have a mother, for example, and that's really key. Good question here from Tom. Some people may agree with the general principles against these technologies, yet still support IVF. Isn't that inconsistent? I would say yes and no, because I think there's two moral questions here. One is the one I was just referring to about producing children, deliberately producing children who are not going to be brought up by their biological parents. I think that's wrong from the point of view of the children's right to their mother and father, if you like. So there's that aspect, which isn't shared by IVF necessarily. IVF is often a couple producing a child to bring up their own genetic child. But the discarding of embryos, fertilized embryos, that is absolutely common to both, and I think is a moral problem for both. So it could be consistent for a person to oppose one and not the other, but personally, I oppose both. But I think the case we're looking at here is sort of doubly wrong. It's wrong for the destruction of the embryos and for producing the, in this case, the motherless child. So,
yeah. Question: would you be okay with IVF if only one egg at the time would be fertilized?
Yes, I would be, with a caveat. I mean, the teaching of the Catholic Church, as I understand it, is you shouldn't separate procreation from the natural sex act. That any unnatural interference, imposition within that process is wrong. And I think that's something well worth considering.
I agree. Yeah.
It's a very valid point. I haven't thought it through hugely. I don't regard it as like a conclusive argument at the moment. So, yeah, I'd be inclined to say if IVF didn't involve the discarding of the embryos, I would be inclined to think, well, okay. But I think the Catholic position is, it's something I would need to think about a bit more. There's something in it, that's for sure. What do you think, Phil Holden?
Yeah, I think this whole thing's opening up even wider with even like mother and fatherless babies. I saw something like that that we're on the cusp of as well, and so I think it's important to draw some lines really. For IVF, I'm against IVF, and I'd probably say if it was one egg and one sperm, then well, if it was one egg, then I guess I'd kind of be okay with that. If you're not discarding fertilized embryos, then I'd probably be all right with that. But yeah, the present situation, I don't think is good.
Yeah. Just to clarify family party policy, surrogacy, we're just completely against it. We would ban it, as an awful lot of other European countries do. I can't remember the list off the top of my head, but that wouldn't be like some crazy radical policy of the family party. That would be in line with a lot of other European countries. IVF, our situation is that we don't have a policy on it. And the reason is that the abortion issue is the central one we're focusing on. And I think the IVF issue, I hadn't really understood it until a relatively short number of years ago. So I think with abortion, we've got an absolute mountain to climb, and we're working really hard on that. I think to introduce an IVF as well for the family party would be, it would be like taking on one too many battles. On the other hand, I'm very happy to state my view on any occasion about it. And I do get asked about it from time to time. So anyone of the family party is very welcome to state their view. Right, that was interesting. Right, let's proceed here. What have we got next? Oh yeah, a bit of a question here. Well, what I wrote in this post on X was drag equals cross-dressing equals deliberate gender corruption equals promotion of transgenderism equals honoring delusions equals messing up kids. I guess my question is, does Keir Starmer really in his heart of hearts think, yeah, that this is really what I want to promote? Or is he just going with the flow because that's what the Labour Party is full of? So does Sir Keir Starmer really believe, is he really a drag enthusiast? Or is he just going through the motions?
That's a very good question. I was thinking the same thing when I saw this. My thought was, does he really think this is normal? And then I realized that depending on in which part of society you live, it might feel quite normal if everybody else says it's normal. So I do think it's the flavor of the week. And I don't think that Keir Starmer has a personality. And as far as I know, he has said so much himself. He doesn't have a favorite book. He doesn't have a favorite poem. He doesn't dream, as far as I know. So I don't think Keir Starmer has potentially. I don't think he has a personality. So I don't know if he actually has a position towards drag queens, but he's told or he knows that you should like them at the moment. So that's what he does.
They're symbolic of the LGBT movement, aren't they? If you're having a Burns night, I mean, unless you're going to put like a rainbow flag stuck in the top of the haggis, another way to do it is you have a drag queen there. Phil, what do you think? Is Keir Starmer a sincere supporter?
He looks more sincerely happy there than he did congratulating Trump on his win. That's my thought on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
my other thought was that just reminds me so much. There was that drag queen who was an assistant of Mary Black working in the Parliament, and then he resigned from that and he went and got the top job at HIV Scotland. Then before you know it, he was in court for, I think it was having taken naked photographs of people without their consent or something. I can't remember his name. But the picture was just exactly the same. In Westminster, political party, the leaders, this is the sort of person they want to associate with. So it just made me think, yet again, SNP equals Labour. Just the values are virtually identical.
A friend of ours, she's older and she's a lovely lady, but I would say she is the prime victim for the BBC, for example, or the mainstream media. So her opinion is almost exclusively based on what she was currently told by the BBC. And we recently talked about drag queens, and I said that I don't like them, that I never really liked them very much, and the more they are pushed into my face, the less I like them. Not on a personal level. I mean, I'm sure there are nice individuals that do it, but I just don't want to see it anymore. And she told me about a drag queen who was apparently part of RuPaul's Drag Race and who died at the age of 32 or something like that, not too long ago. I didn't know the case, but I looked it up afterwards. And I said to my friend, I said, well, if that person died at 32 and it wasn't in the article what the person died of, then honestly, I think it's safe to assume that it was probably a drug overdose, because that is so normal in these circles. And the lifestyle choices are so bad, and both drug use, depression, and all of that is rampant, and the people are often very unhappy. And she said, yeah, but they're really fun to look at.
Yeah. But don't forget what the queerographic history book from the school library at King Lot Burvey High School said. It said, for example, the idea that you should be happy, that's like heteronormative, oppressive, capitalist idea. We need to break free from that. Why should everyone be happy? So if something makes you really miserable and you're just depressed and ill, then who's to say that's a bad thing?
Yeah, but I just thought, because apparently I think this drag artist was also on something like Strictly Dancing or whatever it's called. But by putting these characters in more and more shows, it just normalizes it for the public, and that's why, for example, even in rural communities like up here, people don't seem to have a big problem with a drag queen being the headmaster.
No, yeah, absolutely. And the BBC is obsessive about it.
Yeah.
Now, this is an interesting story. This comes up from time to time in Scotland, and you get people saying, we want to know what's in the sex education lessons. We want freedom of information request, no secrecy. You must show us. We demand that you reveal what's in the sex education lessons. And you just think, it's all online already. It has been for about 6 years now. I mean, the Scottish government says it's there, and that's what substantial majority of schools use. And yet, still, even now, it's as though it's protected by some sort of invisible shield that prevents media analysis of the Scottish government sex education materials. And it's like a strange mystery to me. What is the force field that prevents people from looking at what the government has got online as its recommended sex education materials?
But is this an England story, or is this a Scotland story?
No, it's Scotland.
Scotland, okay.
Yeah.
I would say it's a similar force field that protected the grooming gangs for so long. It's people are not supposed to notice it. You can't in the case of the grooming gangs, it was heritage or race or something, and here it's LGBT ideology and just not coming across as prudish. I mean, I was definitely, I would say here in my community, I experienced less criticism or being less ostracized for being a gay porn actor than for being a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
So
I think on this one as well, that the thing about 100 genders, that's not in the rshp.scot stuff, is it?
No.
That's more like an activist teacher bringing that in.
Yeah, if it's true. But if you're any sort of campaigner or politician or media outlet, then your main story should be the main body of material used in lessons promoted by the government. That should be your main focus. But still, it's as though people just I think there is I feel these days the big taboos. I think pro-life is a big taboo. You're a real baddie with that. I think LGB, criticizing anything LGB, is a big taboo. Transgender is a bit more of an open debate. But I think sex education is a big taboo as well. I think people are worried that if you're somehow against sex education, then that really is extremely unenlightened. And that's like a beyond the pale view, which is strange. But then the sex surveys plastered all over the front page of newspapers. Look at these terrible sex surveys being given to children in schools. So somehow or other that was acceptable, but the actual content of the lessons is taboo somehow. It's very, it's an ongoing curiosity to me. Right, this is a transgender killer gets out of prison for cosmetic surgery. I mean, we don't need to talk about this. I mean, basically everyone watching, you're all thinking the same thing, aren't you? This was in Scotland, so let's just move on. I made a video about that. We'll move on from that as well. I will mention this. Our display of 18,000 lights to symbolize the 18,000 lives lost to abortion last year. It was scheduled for, whenever it was, 25th of January. But it was a bit windy. It wasn't so windy we were worried we were going to be blown into the ponds in front of the Parliament, but we were worried the lights might be blowing around, which might have made it into a bit of a farce. So we've rescheduled 8th of February, Saturday the 8th of February, 7 till 8 p.m. in front of the Parliament. That's 1,000 lights, and they're piled up on top of each other, actually, so that they don't look as many as there are. But we've got the whole 18,000, so we're going to lay them out. Phil and I have been discussing how to lay them out, but it's going to look very striking indeed. So as many people there as possible would be great as well. We'll have a couple of speeches, some time of silent reflection or prayer. And yeah, we've got some pictures. We'll make some videos as well, film some little bits of people just giving their view to compile into a video. And then actually, these are going to Stornoway on Saturday. We're showing them in Percival Square in Stornoway on Saturday. So that's going to be their debut. So if anywhere in Scotland, if you think it would be great to have these lights outdoors, it needs to be dark, outdoors, or at an indoor event as well. We can set them up indoors. Then get in touch with us and we'll see what we can do. But 8th of February, 7 till 8 p.m. It would be great to see you while I'm at it on events. Right, Phil, if you could just bear with me for a moment. Stornoway on Saturday, 3 p.m. We've got a meeting. And after then, we're going to show the lights in Percival Square. What else have we got coming up? Monday, the 3rd of February, we're having a meeting in Inverness. It's a sort of informal gathering in Inverness. I think it's called McNabb's Bar. You can see the details on social media. So Inverness, 7 p.m. Monday evening. It'll be great to see you. And also coming up is myself and Neil as well. Neil Deepnarain will be speaking at Vision Church in Glasgow on the 9th of February. So if you like, quite often people come along to that. Their church service is at 2:00 in the afternoon. So sometimes people who go to other churches come along to that as well, but you would be very welcome. There are events brewing in Aberdeen as well. We're planning a couple of things in Aberdeen, and Orkney and Thurso going to be happening quite soon. So there's various things coming up. So keep your eye on on our social media, newsletter, etc. But that one, 8th of February, Saturday, the 8th of February, 7 till 8 p.m. It will be great to see you. We'll probably find somewhere to have a drink to warm up after as well. So
I just had an idea about the 18,000 lights. How about going into city centers, if that is possible, and making an installation and actually making it like a fun guessing game, just having these lights up and say you can win 50 quid if you guess what these 18,000 lights represent, and people can write down what they think. It's something about Scotland, something fun about, or something about Scotland, and people can write down. And after 1 hour, we're going to disclose what it is. So make your guess and then come back, and then you reveal that it's abortions. And everybody obviously assumes that it's something funny or something enjoyable. And I think that might be quite a shock for people.
Yeah, we've thought about that sort of idea of revealing to people or lay them all in a string so people walk along them. Laid end to end, it's almost 0.5 kilometre of lights. So someone could be walking past them for a long time and then get to the end and find out what they are. What are your latest thoughts on the layout, Phil, for the Parliament?
Yeah, so I've got two thoughts. One is in the garden area beside the Parliament, because then you can get the Parliament in shot. So one of the key things about this is that the kind of photo opportunity for them. And the other is maybe to just lay them out in a kind of grid in front of the Parliament, you know. And I think that's probably... if you're there, that's probably the nicest one to have, because you feel like you're in front of the Parliament. But perhaps as a shot, then I think that's a good one. Another one I want to do is what Richard talked about, is a long line of them. Maybe have all the lights, and you could have somebody perhaps walking along beside them and talking, and just that gives them, probably 10 minutes or so to talk to how fast they speak, to speak about what they're about. Or just cycling past them or something, with a camera and a bike. Yeah. But yeah, if you've got ideas about good shots with them, it's a publicity tool. So yeah. Also, I'm speaking this weekend at Corstorphine Community Church. Yeah. So you can look up on their site to see when that service is. But...
yeah, Corstorphine Community Church, Phil Holden this Sunday morning. Right, great. Right, on we go. After that interlude. There's so many stories that the media, it's just unbelievable the number of stories that are coming out about discipline problems in Scottish schools. And it really is absolutely crisis level. And this is the Conservatives saying, oh, the SNP are not doing anything about it. But what do the Conservatives want doing about it? What have they been saying over the last years when all these terrible policies have been introduced? Classic Conservatives, the government does something that's like totally wrong, that anyone with like conservative instincts should see it immediately and say, right, that's in the wrong direction. That's not going to work. We oppose it. But the Scottish Conservatives, well, the UK Conservatives as well, to a large degree, they would just go with the flow. They'd parrot the same lines as everyone else in the Parliament. At the time they should be opposing something when it's introduced. And then maybe, 5 or 10 years later, they're saying, oh, well, this is wrong. They need to do something about this. There's no principles. They've got no standpoint to judge the government's policies from. It's very frustrating. Just my last thing on this, restorative practice, this idea that if a boy thumps another boy and beats him up, knocks him black and blue down to the ground or whatever, gives him a couple of kicks, then restorative practice says that what you've got to do, you've got to help the boys to make friends again. The boy who kicked him in the head, you've got to help him to realize that people don't like being kicked in the head, because that's the real issue. If he only realized people don't like being kicked in the head, then he wouldn't do it. So you sit down with him and you talk it through and say, well, do you think he liked being kicked in the head? And the boy said, no, I don't. Maybe he didn't. And the teacher thinks, oh, I've really got through to him now. I've really dealt with this issue. And all the other pupils just think, well, nothing happened. He totally got away with it. And the boy who did the kicking, he's thinking, what a total joke. I've got away with it completely. So this is restorative practice. And it was introduced years ago. I was still teaching when it was introduced. I remember sitting in a training session at the school I was in, and someone was expounding this new philosophy, and I just sit there thinking, this is totally wrong. This is going to be an absolute disaster. So I wrote an essay about it. I wrote, I can't remember how many thousand words, but it was a substantial essay going through all the different points to explain why this won't work. Problems with it. It was quite a decent sort of academic style essay about it. So I gave it to the leadership of the school where I was teaching, where they ignored it. And I also sent it to the Conservatives' education spokeswoman, who was Liz Smith at the time. And she replied to me saying, basically, I agree. You're right. But what did she do? What did the Conservatives do at the time? Nothing. They didn't campaign against it, not a squeak. They just let it come in. And that, viewers, is why you need to vote for the family party. Because we've got to stop these things at the point they're being introduced, at the point where people ought to be able to see this is just totally wrong. This is not going to work. Rather than like experimenting on children for 10 years and just letting behavior in schools reach crisis point. Anyway, that's my
Richard.
That's my emotional talk finished.
Richard, obviously, as leader of the Scottish Family Party, you have to say that, yes, Scottish schools can be saved. But as a teacher and as a person, do you think the educational system can actually be saved? I wonder that because so many of the experienced teachers that loved their job have left the profession. Because of the abuse that they face and because the system is dead against them. The people that are still teachers are supportive of the system and ask themselves why it's getting so bad, because they don't understand. They just think we just have to do even more of the same stuff for it to get better. So do you think there's any chance to actually save the system?
Just as I think a lot of teachers now, they think the problem is there's not enough support teachers in the class. So they might have, a friend of mine's a teacher in a high school. He said they had one boy once who had 4 members of staff following him around everywhere. A psychologist, a social worker, and anyway, 4 people with him all the time. So I think often the teachers think, oh, the problem is it's just that mean old, it's those Tory cuts. If you only had enough money for more support teachers, it would be okay. Can the system be saved? I think my answer to that, I think there's two ways it could be done, or it could be attempted. One way would be the Trump method. The Trump method would be that we're shutting down Education Scotland. We're like closing every education department in universities. We're closing the GTCS, and we're totally changing the rules how schools work. And these are your policies now. This is the way you have to do it. To be honest, I think that would just be such a war. I think the whole system would break down. I don't think it would produce instant change. It would just produce collapse there. So I think it would have to be a slightly more measured process. I mean, Family Party policy is shut down Education Scotland, who promoted this restorative practice. So then there needs to be a degree of gradualism, but in many cases, it's not a matter of persuading the people in the key positions to change their ideology. I mean, the people need to go. Like if I was the head of Education Scotland and the Green Party got elected, they really would need to fire me. There's no point in them saying to me, hello, Mr. Lucas, this is our philosophy of education now. We'd like you to implement this on our behalf through the education agency. They'd be wasting their time. It's just not going to happen. They would need to fire me and get someone else to do it. And I think a massive amount of that needs to happen.
But how many capable teachers and professionals are still there and are not retired to actually change the system?
I think a lot of the young teachers, it's not that they're very capable. I saw a lot of young teachers coming out of college, then they were really good in lots of ways, but they were like accepting of the system that, you know, basically kids misbehaved and you just had to live with it and whatever. So changing the ethos in the whole of the system is a massive thing, where you've got the unions dead against you and you can't appoint them. You've got the whole Education Scotland, GTCS, the teacher training colleges, everything against you. So it would need someone with a very strong will and a very clear vision to set about making the change. And
does it need another system, basically? You know, that and then the ability of parents to opt out. Mm-hmm. You know, and part of me thinks the opportunity that you have with AI at the moment as well. You know, that I'm starting to hear cases of people that have basically, you know, for one reason or another, that they're maybe in some far-flung place and they can't get education, so they're using an AI model to learn, and they're getting, you know, straight A's and A pluses and all these kind of things. You know, so where there's these self-motivated people, they're doing very well with that. And I think it's a bit of a game changer for home education and community-based education, because you know, the most off-putting thing for education is probably that you feel, oh, I'm not an expert in chemistry, I'm not an expert in physics, or some of those things. But really, that objection now, I think, has gone. And so
I think also the lockdowns and the increase of using Zoom, for example, that made it much easier for people to homeschool. People know now that you can do education via Zoom or other means. So I think that opened quite a few doors.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. That's another approach, is to allow, like, have education vouchers, take away VAT and business rates from independent schools, let independent schools flourish, and let parents spend their voucher.
And I think if there's one system that works and one system that doesn't, then people will quickly migrate to the thing that's working away from the thing that's not.
Yeah, absolutely. The AI thing is interesting. If you imagine, say, like a language class, the ideal thing, if you're learning to speak a language, is that you have a conversation with the AI or a real person, and everything you say, they'll correct it. They'll correct your pronunciation. They'll just help you. Like every pupil in a class of 30 can have that with AI. Surely that's
and in every subject that it, you know, I feel that AI can bring something to your level. You know, that it can pick up that you make a mistake. I mean, I feel like vast amounts of time are wasted because you have to keep a group of 30 people together. There's one bright spark at the top of the class who finishes all the work in 5 minutes and is dying for something more. There's another person who's struggling along at the back. And then there are a few other people that are being lost along the way in each lesson or something like that. And with AI, it can pick up the point that you lose the plot, the point that you don't get it, and say, right, I'm just gonna make sure that you've got this, and it can move on as soon as you have, and so I think there's an opportunity to go kind of double the rate with some things, but it sort of relies a little bit on, the job of the humans in that is motivation, because if you sit somebody down with a computer, then the computer's got no arms or legs and can't keep you engaged.
Yeah, I think the possibilities for education, you could have schools that look very dramatically different. I think it is feasible even now. When I mentioned, say, foreign language, let's say French, that you have a class of pupils preparing for higher French or whatever, and you don't have a French teacher.
Yeah,
do it online. Someone will need to be monitoring them, making sure they're working and whatever, but you don't necessarily need a French teacher.
And that would be great for rural areas as well, because at the moment, like, our rural schools don't work at all. For 2 years, we have a Spanish teacher, and then he moves away, and then they start French, and nobody can actually finish what they wanted to learn.
Yeah. Right. This next, I've got 2 stories about BBC bias here. Now, people watching, and Phil, I'm sure you'll like these. I really like them in any case. So, Facebook's basically said, we're going to make sure we're neutral. We think we've been pulled in one direction politically. We're going to be neutral, and we're going to allow more free speech on our platforms. So obviously the BBC is not happy with this. The BBC does not want to be neutral. So the BBC wants to turn this into a bad news story. So the headline is, Meta denies forcing users to follow Trump administration accounts. So what springs to mind, Phil, when you read that? What do you imagine that Meta's doing? If you're the average
automatically BBC... adding Trump as your friend.
Yeah.
That's
what it creates, isn't it? Right. So I'll tell you what was actually happening. So this is people who follow, for example, President of the United States Facebook account. And the President of the United States changes from one person to another, but you're following President of the United States. Right. So when there's a new president, you can choose if you want to unfollow them or unfriend them or whatever. But this story was based on the fact that some people, for example, had unfriended President of the United States or unfollowed, but it hadn't happened instantly. There'd been a bit of a delay before it went off. And that was the source of the BBC coming up with that headline. That is deliberately deceptive, isn't it? It's deliberately trying to give a false impression.
Oh, what I would give to have their problems.
Yeah. Right. And now here's another one. This is another one, exactly the same sort of thing here. Right. So Donald Trump has said, cut all the DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, nonsense. Cut it all out of the military, for example. So the BBC came up with a headline: Donald Trump DEI order sees female and black World War II pilots cut from. Now I'll finish it off. I'll explain why it's not there anymore. Cut from training course. So female and black World War II pilots cut from training course, and then they had to update it later on. Actually, I think the headline I saw, first of all, was it said DI order sees female and black pilots cut from training course. So what does that make it sound like?
Makes it sound like people are being thrown off the course because they're female or black, whereas in reality that there was probably some course material which highlighted that among the people that were pilots were some that were female and some which were black, and it drew special attention to them, whereas now they just talk about pilots in general without mentioning their gender or their sex, or their
but then the BBC had to correct it. So below is the same article. US Air Force will still teach about black pilots. So they teach about the history of the USAF, and there were like black squadrons and women. So just part of the history. So that was actually remaining. So the BBC determined to make a story, determined to make it as if You know, that they've deliberately, it's like, so they've gone through the course, and any black pilots, or you take those out. Only white pilots are allowed to be in the training course. That's what the BBC is trying to create. And it's quite sinister. I mean, the person who's writing that story, they know full well that they've been misleading.
Oh, absolutely. But I think more and more people are waking up to it. Unfortunately, we are moving more into a direction where people just don't trust any institutions anymore, and that is very destabilizing. Potentially not a good future.
Yeah. Right, Phil. This is Phil Tanzer. This will be one that's up your street, I think. So what's the report here? So this is in Scotland. So in the Parliament, they've been saying the PSE, personal and social education, must address boys' hate towards girls. So saying there's a widespread problem in Scotland that boys hate girls, and the school system needs to sort this out. You can see our reply there. Boys don't hate girls. It's just in some cases they've got a terrible attitude to sex and relationships, an attitude that's fueled by the sex education in schools. So they tend to think if a boy mistreats a girl sexually or in a relationship, that's because he hates girls. I just don't get that, sir. Phil Tanzer, take it away. This is your territory, isn't it?
Actually, I think that that real hatred towards women and girls is increasing due to decades of hate and discrimination against men and boys. And I do think that voices like Andrew Tate rile young people up against feminism, which I 100% support. I'm against every single wave of feminism. I think there was never a good version of feminism. But unfortunately, it will come with a hate towards women, which might be associated with the ideology of feminism. Just like feminism identified man with the so-called patriarchy. So I think that the hate that was forced into women towards men will slowly be mirrored by men and boys against women. And I think we see a society about to collapse when men don't care about women anymore, and when women don't care about children anymore. And we have lived in a society where women are taught to disregard their children, leave them, like prioritize their jobs over their children, or outright kill their unborn children. And now and we've had that for a very long time. And I think we're moving now into a time where men might stop protecting and supporting women. And I think it's not a good, it's an understandable, but not a good direction.
Okay, let's just have that quote again. Was that yours original, or was that from someone else? Society's going to collapse when men don't care for women, and women don't care about women, and women don't care about children.
Yeah.
Did you? Is that your?
I've heard something similar. I've heard something similar before. I don't know if it was Douglas Murray, but I've heard something similar along these lines. I don't know if it was exactly that, but I don't want to take credit for something that I think I've heard in a variation before.
Yeah, well, that's a good line. Like it. Phil Holder, what do you think?
So yeah, like I kind of think that men and women they sort of need each other, and you'll end up with resentment when those relationships don't form, and feminism plays a part in that not happening. There's probably movements on the male side which do the same thing as well, and so I think that probably the healthy attitude that the role model that you want for men and women is a husband and wife. That's where you learn that, is seeing a mother and father that stay together and those kind of things. that there's forgiveness, there's tolerance, there's love, you know, and I think that's why as a party that we you know want to encourage marriage, because it's in some ways it's not totally the domain of the school to teach those things. What do you think, Richard?
It's not the domain of the school to teach.
To sort of to teach relationships in general. You know, like for me growing up, there was never relationship education. There was sex education. There wasn't relationship education. Relationships were just, you know, a natural part of life, I guess.
I would agree that like friendship classes are a bad idea. I would say if you've got an individual kid who's got trouble making friends, and normally you'll see what it is about them that's the problem. Okay, you can have a little chat sometime and say, maybe if you didn't do this, or maybe, okay, fair enough. But the idea that you make it into something that you learn how to do, I think is counterproductive. So I think lessons about, as there are now in the Scottish Government's resources, about how to maintain a healthy sexual relationship, you know, how to communicate or whatever. No, I would ditch the lot. But I still think marriage can be promoted by explaining what it is and what it's aiming to do, and the philosophy, the evidence, etc. So I think that could be put forward. But all the other stuff, that just leave it for the Sunday magazines, the modern day equivalents on social media. I don't think it's, I don't think human nature in these areas is particularly enhanced by lessons in them. So.
Unfortunately, our media has been undermined for decades now, never showing functional marriages and functioning parenthood. When you tune into any TV show or movie nowadays, you almost never see a family. I think the last time that I saw a functioning family was in the horror movie A Quiet Place, with Emily Blunt and her husband, her real life husband. He directed it, and it was a wonderful story of a family that worked together to survive the apocalypse, and they were even praying at the table. And I remember I was in the cinema, and I was shocked. I was shocked to see a family, a functioning family where people care about each other. And I think we have been undermined by the media for decades. And unfortunately, I think the only way to change that is to force it back. Like to say you need programs with positive role models, and but under the current in the current political climate, the positive role models, unfortunately, would be drag queens and queer families and surrogacy and all that crap.
Yeah. Now, we need to cover one more thing very quickly. Otherwise, I will have failed to do what it says on the tin, which was to have a talk about Axel Rudakubana. What I wanted to talk about this, it was about his background and how this has been reported. Basically, the police came to the conclusion there was no ideological drive, so they didn't say it was a terrorist attack. Obviously, he was obsessed with violence. I did read reports that he had read a substantial about white privilege, decolonializing, racism, etc. So that seemed to have been a significant interest to him. I would imagine that the police would look at that and think, well, that couldn't possibly, that's not an ideology, that couldn't possibly be a motivation. So I would fear that maybe that possible motivation wasn't given the consideration it should have been. But I think the other interesting thing with this is you always hear with these cases, well, we'll often hear, he was reported to the PREVENT program, or such and such an incident happened. And the implication is, these people should have done something about him, and that's why they're called PREVENT. They should have done something. But what I always want to know for that is how many people are reported to PREVENT every week. I mean, if 1,000 people are reported every week, then you've got to be realistic. But the things he was reported for, I'll just read a couple of them to you. I wasn't aware of them. First became known to officials in 2019. Increasing concerns over his behavior, he contacted Childline and asked, what should I do if I want to kill somebody? In the following days, he explained he wanted to kill someone who was bullying him at school. The incident was referred to the police, who visited him shortly afterwards. He was temporarily excluded from school. He was expelled after it disclosed that he'd taken a knife to school on about 10 occasions. 17th of October 2019, during his admission meetings, he was asked why he'd taken a knife to his previous school, to which he replied to use it. In November 2019, he was referred to the anti-extremism unit. But to long story short, on one occasion, he got dressed in the same gear he wore for the murders he committed, and he had a knife with him, and he got a taxi, was trying to get a taxi to his school where he'd been banned. The school had said he's not allowed on our campus at all. But he was going to get a taxi to go to that school, and his father stopped the taxi driver from taking him. And it's pretty apparent that he was on his way to his old school to perform some sort of massacre there. But repeated interactions with the police, I guess part of it raises the questions like the Clockwork Orange question, is what can you do to someone before they've offended? I mean, should you have been locked up on the basis of psychological reports and concerns like that, or do you actually have to wait till someone commits a crime? I would be inclined in this case, looking at the record, I think he should have been locked up on the basis of, like, it should have been sectioned psychological reasons and should have been locked up.
I think we need asylums back. I think we need way more support for people with all kinds of mental health problems. And I think it should be easier to lock people away for their own good and for society. On the other hand, I don't want to give the government more powers, because they're abusing them already. And I'm very torn. I think people that say, "Oh, they should have done something," honestly, I think what you're reading out here is quite severe. I mean, that's quite shocking. Actually, saying I want to kill people and so on and so forth. But just because it's severe, it doesn't tell you exactly what to do about it. Because depending on what you do with a person, you can push people more into isolation, into radicalism. I would probably try to cover them with love and purpose and try to take them to church and whatever, and then maybe he commits a massacre in the church. It's really hard.
The danger is if you take someone and say, right, we're going to section you, so you're going to be in some secure institution, and we're going to try and change you and help you. If a person's in that situation, surely their thinking will be, right, all I need to do is not talk about wanting to commit mass murder for the next 5 years, then they'll let me out.
Yeah.
Surely it's quite easy to do that. What do you think, Phil Holden?
So sort of similar to the comment that you put on the screen, that I think one of the things that makes it hard to spot the people that are a real danger is that people that aren't liked for political reasons are put on like the terror watch lists and all these kind of things. We've heard of lots of Christians who've been referred to Prevent and things like that, for basically just having, Christian opinions and things. And so I think having that many false positives makes it harder to spot the people that really are a danger, and so this Prevent watch list is being abused, basically, is being used for a political purpose, and that means that where there's real danger, it's not being highlighted. I think hindsight's 2020. Obviously, easy to say now he should have been locked up, but there are possibly many people that have come close to things like that, or have had a bad moment, and have stepped back from those things. Maybe
you could say with all that information, could they not have raided his house and found the poison that he was making, and the selection of knives, illegal knives, for example? I don't know. I think with Prevent, part of their agenda is to avoid it being called Islamophobic. So I think they're always really keen to be going overboard, to be tackling anything that's not related to Islam, because basically they were set up to tackle Islamic.
And it's obviously a failure of Prevent in terms of their name. You know, that's what they were to do.
Yeah.
You know,
I was threatened.
They didn't manage to do it on that occasion.
I wasn't threatened with being reported. The school I worked at, I was told at one point that something I'd written could have been seen as of interest to the Prevent program. So I wasn't reported, but it was
a threat.
Told that I was, in danger of it. I just wanted to tell a little story back from my days teaching. We had a boy who came to the school where I was at. He'd moved from another school where things weren't working out very well for him, let's say. And this boy, he was about 15 or 16, and he quickly developed a reputation for being obsessed with weapons. And so in the school assemblies, sometimes boys would give a report of a trip that they'd been on. And a couple of times, at least once, but I think more than once, a boy would report, we went to such and such a place, we went around this time, and in front of the whole school, they would joke that this boy, they would name him and say he found a weapons shop and I went and had a look at that, or he tried to buy a knife or something. And it was like a standing joke in the school. And he left the school. Nothing happened in the school, but then a few years later, it was in the paper that he'd been acquiring a selection of illegal firearms with his mum's credit card. And it got a significant arsenal in his bedroom at home. And his internet history was full of searches about massacres, about mass killings. So when this happened, I said in the school, I think we should have some sort of internal review of this. Because I think there's some lessons to be learned here, because we've sort of ignored this.
Yeah.
And for all we know, that could have been, quite a big mistake for the school. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But that suggestion wasn't taken up at all. The attitude was more, so what? Nothing happened? Let's just forget about it and move on. But I thought, right, you really got to learn from that. That should have been ringing alarm bells much more loudly than it did. But I think through teaching, you do come across, boys I was teaching in particular, you do occasionally come across one that's just obsessed with violence, and sometimes just like obsessed with evil, the thing that really fires them up, and you get some sort of engaged, that their eyes light up when they're talking about something that's wrong. And it's
the thing is, I think if people would have, I was a weird kid in school, and I drew. I was fascinated with horror movies and splatter movies and violence and all of that, but I couldn't even harm a fly. So it's really difficult sometimes to tell if somebody is just interested in more morbid things, but completely harmless, or if somebody has violent fantasies. In that area, I would recommend the movie We Need to Talk About Kevin with Tilda Swinton. It's the portrait of a family where the son at the end becomes a killer, a school killer, and it's about the relationship between the parents and the boy, warning signs and things like that. Then very, very interesting movie to watch.
Mm-hmm. Okay, right. I think we'll draw things to a close there. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. We've got a few more than usual tonight. I'll come back next week. It'd be great to see you on our travels. We've got social media to see where we're going. So thanks, Phil and Phil, for taking part tonight. It was interesting to hear what you've got to say. And those of you who are watching later as well, hope you enjoy it, and see you next week. Rest of good night.
Goodbye.